his final days and what followed immediately after his death was ever much as chaotic, maybe more chaotic than anything that had taken place in his life.
Marlon Brando died on July 1st, 2004. The man regarded by film fans as the century's greatest actor had spent the last part of his life enclosed in his bedroom in the Hollywood Hills. The former Adonis lay slumped in bed, an oxygen tube in his nose, overcome by his obesity, ravaged by his 80 years, walled in by his celebrity. Up until his final days, he passed the time calling his closest friends, his most stalwart allies. Like his third wife, a Polynesian, whom he had often tormented, and whom he summoned from Tahiti to his deathbed. For the first time, he told her, "Terita, I love you." He called his friend and business manager, for whom he reserved one last dirty trick.
You better not have fallen asleep. And I would wake up and I'd say, Marlon, I need to get to sleep.
So
He called his long-serving Hollywood agent.
he would call you at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "What are you doing?" I'd say, "What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm asleep."
And an old flame from his youth to whom he said, not far from death's door, "Let's start over."
He used to say, "You know me better than anybody in the world." And I said, "I know you maybe better, but I don't understand you at all." There was no understanding him. No.
He probably thought of those he had made suffer and cast aside, such as his first wife.
No. A vindictive person. Pure evil. Pure evil.
Marlon kept a loaded pistol under the bed. He lies in bed, he reaches down to get it. He had several things under the bed. He had the .38 pistol. I understand he also had a shotgun, but he also had his piss bottle, which is say Marlon, even before he became ill, spent half his life in bed. And he was a lazy man. He didn't want to get up and walk the 6-7 feet over here to the bathroom.
Why did he call you on that day, his last day before he died?
He called with a voice and a timbre in his voice I'd never heard before, not only in his, not in anybody's. Near hysteria, near desperation. And he said, "Georgie, I just want to hear your voice. I just want to know everything's okay. I love you." And I'm going to cry now, but don't worry about that. It's because I'd take a bullet for you. And I thought, it's within the realms of possibility. He's dying, he wants me to die too. Yeah. He had weapons, and I knew him. I knew how his mind could leapfrog into something else. So I drove up the driveway, and everything was overgrown, looking gray, looking unwatered, and haunting. When I came in the room, he always liked to have music playing. This time, Poulenc, yeah. And there was no chair to sit in by the bed. It was obvious no one else had been there in a long time. Probably he heard the knocking at the gate. In discussion, you don't say, "I'm dying." In fact, when we talked about it, he said, "If it doesn't, fuck it. I don't give a shit." Those were his words.
This conversation with his greatest friend would be the last. The next day, Marlon Brando was taken to hospital, where he died from a lung infection.
He is an emperor, and his kingdom is on the march.
Among the last people he saw was his friend Scott Billups. He had filmed Brando's last public appearance 2 years previously at an actor's workshop the star had organized.
And the idea was basically to just get his principles down on tape for posterity, you know? And that's all I had in mind.
He also recorded some previously unseen and more troubling images. The last of Brando alive, just 10 days before his death.
Great American people. Well, the great American people are people who stepped off the boat, and John Wayne said, well, glad to have you here, partner. You're a great American, in case you didn't know it.
He looks in good shape.
Acting.
The only thing that makes America
Brando
great
accorded his friend this last interview on his bedroom balcony as a farewell gift.
that we have here, the gold, the metal, the steel.
He got his pajamas on under that, and he's got an IV in his arm.
For us,
Right after that, they started pumping him full of drugs, and he just withered away. It was almost instantaneous. It was scary.
So I think you'd be hearing very
But yeah, that's 10 days before he died.
if we landed in Perth, Australia.
For whole generations around the world, Marlon Brando was first and foremost the unforgettable star of The Godfather. And that voice.
If by chance an honest man like yourself should make enemies, then he would become my enemies. And then they would fear you.
Be my friend? Godfather?
For Hollywood, Marlon Brando's career was effectively over by the late 60s. He had made a string of films, many of them on contract, which are totally undistinguished. There's moments of genius in all of them, of course, but it was no longer, the great Marlon Brando. He tried very, very hard to get the role of Don Corleone for The Godfather. He desperately wanted the role.
Brando created a face and a voice borrowed from local mafia bosses he had met during the shooting of On the Waterfront. He appeared before Coppola with Kleenexes stuffed in his cheeks and murmured in a soft, pain-ridden voice. The director was won over. All he had to do was convince the producers.
Bob Evans said, "Who is that?" They didn't even know it was Brando. And as soon as they heard that it was Brando, they said, "Oh, we don't want to go near him. Forget about it. You can't even bond him." Francis, at that point, feigned an epileptic seizure. He fell to the floor. They said, "All right, we'll consider Brando for the role, but you first have to get him bonded." And Marlon had screwed up so much with the earlier films that this was going to be an issue. He took a very low salary. It was a ridiculous amount of money. It was like $50,000 plus 3% or 1.5% of the gross.
But then it was the Niagara Rolls.
He was broke at that point. He had no money. He had fucked up completely. Mismanagement of his affairs. But he sold the points back for a pittance, a couple of $100,000. It would have been millions and millions and millions of dollars. Every time that film is shown on television, Francis Coppola gets a check.
He took a revenge when doing Apocalypse Now.
Are you an assassin? I'm a soldier.
This time, Brando earned almost $1 million every 10 seconds for a film in which he appears for barely 2 minutes.
To collect the bill.
There is in the world of acting, the world over, BB, AB, before Brando, after Brando.
You want to hear my philosophy of life? Do it to him before he does it to you.
This is a man who lacked in the character department. He did not feel. I mean, there are people who refer to Marlon as a sociopath. No guilt, no feeling, no power of empathy. And yet, what makes this such a complicated story is, as an actor, his sense of empathy and identification with characters, it was without parallel.
A streetcar named Desire triggered a revolution.
Don't you ever talk that way to me.
Until Brando, actors had been clean-cut, immaculately dressed paragons of virtue. Brando represented only himself and excelled as a brute, exploiting his body, acting from the gut.
And you loved it. Having them colored lights going. And wasn't we happy together? Wasn't all okay that she showed here?
It won the Pulitzer Prize, the Critics' Award. New York, London, Paris, Brussels, Rome, all cheered it.
Brando, in the role that made him a star.
believe me, baby.
He had a natural kind of freedom and narcissism with his body.
When he dressed in jeans and t-shirt, which became the uniform of both from the beat on to now, it's still the uniform.
Yes, Brando, in the portrayal that labeled him the most exciting, sensual man ever.
During Streetcar, when the costume designer decided to go with the jeans, he said make them tight. He wore them without underpants, so you could see the outlines of his body. It was a symbol of, I guess, of freedom and independence, the motorcycle as well. He was the symbol of rebellion.
With the wild one, to the jeans and t-shirt, Brando added the leather jacket and motorbike, becoming the primal icon for a fashion that still parades the world's streets.
What can you do for me?
Marlon's line in the film was echoed by disillusioned youth throughout the 50s. JFK himself later retorted in his own way. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
It was a symbol of everything which come later, like rock and roll.
Presley revered Brando because Presley came after. Absolutely, it was Brando Presley.
What's the matter, Kathy? I was only trying to...
Where did Brando's acting talent originate?
Remember the night.
From a beloved woman, his mother.
Time I went out scrambling.
From his childhood with an alcoholic mother, as he confided to his friend George England.
I'd come home from school in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and she'd be in a corner there, bottle next to her, and I'd stare at her and want her to know that I was there. And so I'd say, Mama, Mama, look at me, Mama. I'm Olympia, our cow. And then I'd imitate the cow, show her the big eye, and that would wake her up. And so I'd want to follow that up and keep her awake. And then I'd do our pig, and then our dog, and then I would imitate our neighbors. And Mama would laugh. And I hated that. I wanted us to be like regular people. Mother and son come home, she's there, has a cherry pie or something.
His father, too, was a drunk. Marlon was afraid of him. An insensitive, violent man who beat his wife. The boy had a troubled childhood. He failed in school, ultimately believing he was dumb. His mother was a theater fan and had sometimes acted herself. She encouraged him to get on stage. Suddenly, he discovered something he was good at. He existed and could impress his parents.
And then an extraordinary event takes place in the life of Marlon Brando. His mother dies. Marlon nosedives. It's as if he no longer has to prove that he is a great actor. Because his mother, of course, he was doing all of this for his mother.
Suddenly liberated, Brando no longer saw his acting career as his priority. And so he devoted his time to his principal interest, women.
Well, there you go.
Marlon Brando no doubt conquered more women than Don Juan and Casanova put together. As the end approached, perhaps he reflected on the many actresses and mistresses who fell for his seductive power.
I love you.
He was so beautiful when he was young that he could get anybody he wanted, and did, of course. And the women understood that. I mean, one woman would knock on his door and she'd find another woman in bed and she'd say, oh, excuse me, I'll come back later. It was that kind of thing. But they all understood. They were part of this huge kind of harem.
I said, you know, Marlon, you could call any woman out of the phone book, and married or not, she'd come over here.
Am I going to see you again?
What for? I really don't know.
That's fine.
He did have tremendous sexuality. I don't think he was romantic, really. He was a macho guy. He was a male chauvinist pig. I mean, certainly a feminist would say that, but I would imagine many feminists went to bed with him.
Fame at the age of 23-24 only added to his seductive charms.
He was famous as what they call a hunk. You know, they'd get off the airplane and the women would stand there with their shirts open, you know.
He had the most infectious and beautiful and seductive smile, which I saw.
I was a woman in Marlon's life. We had had this rather deep love affair when we were very young. He knew how to seduce, and one way he seduced was by being more interested in you than anyone had ever been, including your mother and your father. Really studying you, really interested in you and everything you said. He really knew everything about the other person. Now this, of course, is very flattering. And he was very tactile. He always held you, you know, and he always held you. His hands were always someplace. He was very tactile.
He'd say, "Let me see your hand." Give her hand. He'd take it in both of his and start to massage it. But in a way that was not somebody stroking a hand. It was saying, "I'm virtually inside your underwear now."
He had women know each other. So he had them, this one came in, that one came in. He was always had the secretary, the cook, that was always his mistress. After a certain amount of time, that was the mistress. And then he had the girlfriends. So there was this conflict that went on all the time, all the time.
Christina, she was his maid. Been here from Guatemala or someplace, 2 months. She didn't know, and one of the valuable things was she didn't know Marlon Brando. She didn't know anything about, and I remember the day he started telling me about her ass, how extraordinary it was. And I thought how extraordinary, of all the asses you know in this world, that you pick hers, which was pleasant but not distinguished, in my opinion. And so it led into this marriage he had with 3 children, and that was an enigma.
I don't know what he was doing, but he certainly was hurting them, I'll tell you that. I mean, really, the agony that came out of... I myself, I mean, had such agony with him when I was young, and even later, I would say that the main experience that they all had was pain.
You're trying to fool beside yourself. Little girl, a man hold himself against you would break you like a bundle of sticks.
People went through agony, just dropped, no excuse, nothing. Pick up the phone, call him, no answer, nothing. He just let people go.
Give you a sound, natural sleep. Come here.
He let himself be manipulated by women, and then he was in a rage. And he could not, he had to have women suffer. And they suffered, every single one of them.
I see through you. What you see? You like me to tell you? I'd love for you. I see a not so young, not so satisfied woman.
He said, it's a pity you never had a baby because that would have kept us together. Wait. I said, you know, Marlon, I don't get myself knocked up in order to get a guy.
Was he violent?
Not to me, no. Never to me, no. But I've heard stories, yeah.
Marlon Brando's first wife now lives on welfare in a trailer, forgotten by everyone, including the son her husband snatched from her and whom she has not seen for over 10 years. The former starlet did not know who Brando was, which always gave him a kick. And as he regarded her as the most beautiful woman in the world, he thought she was rightfully his.
I like Marlon because his way of thinking, you know. He was generous, he was kind, you know, not only to me, but to other people.
What kind of a lover was he?
A good one.
Yeah?
Yeah, good, very considerate one, yeah.
Gentle?
Mm-hmm. But then I heard strange stories that came around. I thought, oh, God, you know.
What kind of stories?
Homosexual. an astrologist called Ben came to the door. He was very gay, you know, bleached hair and all that. And I looked at him, and his eyes were all red, like he'd been crying, you know. And he said, "This is for you, and I think you'll find this, you know, very useful."
What was it in it?
With another man.
Whom?
Marlon.
You open the envelope, and what do you see?
Marlon with another man. Sexually with another man.
In bed?
Yeah, not in bed, no. You didn't see the bed at all. You feel like a goddamn fool, you know. The other man happened to be Ben's lover. So there was a whole lot of jealousy going on, and, you know, it's tragic. And I always kept that photograph. But when Marlon got nasty with me, I said, "Okay, you want a problem? I'll give you a problem." I left Marlon. I left when all this nonsense came out, you know. He didn't understand that, and he couldn't believe it anyway. Because at that time he was, "I'm Marlon Brando." And I said, "That has nothing to do with it, you know."
This is why he became furious about you.
Absolutely, because that never happened in his life before. And I just took the baby and went. That was it.
And then he runs after you?
Oh, he was furious. I had to go to court, you know, to get it stopped. He said, "Surprising what money will do," meaning that he could persuade the judge or anybody with money. And it did, because
This is why you slapped him?
Yeah. He took my child away from me, you know, and I fought back. And that's how I had that picture from Ben. I gave it to Judge Baroness, you know, because when he said, "Do you have anything against Marlon that I could use?" And I said, "Yes." Give him that photograph. That's how I got my son back.
Rita Moreno, his love of many, many years, devoted, the actress and dancer, Rita Moreno, attempted on Marlon's doorstep, literally, she cut her wrists, and she was collapsed on the doorstep, outside the door. And either she pressed the button before collapsing, I don't know, she's bleeding like a stuck pig. And this was at night, and Alice Marshak is there, and Marlon is there. Marlon doesn't take her to the hospital. Alice takes her to the hospital. I don't want to be bothered. And Pina Pellicer, the Mexican actress, he kept encouraging her to commit. Go ahead, do it. If you really feel that way, do it. And she did it. She actually did it. Tarita went along. They all went along. Marlon was the all-powerful.
More than any of the others, Tarita marked and occupied his life until the end. Shooting Mutiny on the Bounty opened up a whole new world for him. He met the daughter of a fisherman and was all the more affected because he meant nothing to her.
Fletcher Christian is my name.
Is my name?
No. Fletcher.
No. Fletcher.
He won Tarita in the film, but not off screen, which only spurred him on. When shooting continued in Hollywood, he was able to intensify his advances. But the young girl persistently rejected his devilish charms. Finally, perhaps helped by the film's success, and after sleeping beside him fully clothed and untouched for several months, Tarita succumbed. She became pregnant. Marlon already had children with different women and tried his utmost to persuade her to have an abortion. She refused. He raged he would never recognize paternity and demanded that she conceal the pregnancy. Tarita returned to Tahiti alone, where she gave birth to a son. Ultimately, Marlon would go there, adopt the boy and marry the mother, but he would never again share her bed.
Après la naissance de Théotou, vous et Brando, vous n'avez plus jamais été amants. Jamais. Jamais. Pas une fois.
Non. Moi, j'ai pas cru. Je dis, bon, c'est une blague. Mais c'était pas une blague. C'était pas une blague.
Brando fell in love with Tahiti. He bought an entire atoll, Tetiaroa, not far from Papeete, and returned every year to see Tarita and lead a simple life, light years from his Hollywood existence. A few years later, Brando wanted another child with Tarita. But as he still refused to share a bed with his wife, the baby was conceived through artificial insemination. An adorable baby girl was born whom he blessed with an Indian name, Cheyenne, and she became the apple of his eye.
Cheyenne est née là, Tehutu a grandi.
He visited Tahiti regularly, regenerated by heavenly family life, but still sleeping in a separate house to his wife.
Chambre de Marlon.
He could not know that his daughter Cheyenne, whom he cherished perhaps excessively, she would later reproach him for this, would be the bane of his final years. Brando considered his life in Tahiti as his real life. He was free, his time here was precious. In Los Angeles, he hid in the Hollywood Hills, far from the paparazzi and studios he detested. His secluded house was surrounded by bamboo and guarded by every imaginable security device and gadget. Brando spent most of his time in bed, being lazy by nature, where he could watch and listen to anyone who dared to pass by.
He hated any form of celebrity. He used to dress up in weird costumes just to go out and so we could sit in a restaurant undisturbed.
Brando cared so little about his image that he ceded to his voracious appetite, and his Greek god looks were transformed to those of an ogre. His weight reached 170 kilos.
He was not a drinker, and the whole family were alcoholics, a family disease. And his way of filling in that loneliness, that terrible loneliness that alcoholics have, was to eat. Just as simple as that.
It really was not something that he pursued religiously, or he didn't take diet pills, he didn't diet particularly. He had us do things like chain up the refrigerator. Well, we found out the next day that he had called someone and had a dozen Big Macs thrown over the fence into his yard so he could have a midnight dinner.
No one was allowed in. Screenwriters threw their scripts over a barbed wire fence worthy of an American camp in Vietnam. Any producers who showed up were running a serious risk.
You know about the magnet buried in the driveway. Have you ever heard about that story? No. The magnet. Well...
Beneath the entrance gate, Brando installed a powerful electromagnet which could stick any intruder's vehicle to the ground long enough to call the police. On one occasion, one Hollywood producer found his Jaguar removed from its wheels by the 3,000 volts. For when Brando needed money, he responded to the studio's proposals, but only for serious paychecks. The last time was 4 years before he died. The film's producer recounts the hell he was put through.
We had moments of sheer terror. For example, the first day, we brought him to the set and he sat down and started playing the tables for 5 minutes. And then he looked up and he goes, "Oh, we don't need to rehearse, it'll be fine." So he went to his trailer and we got, "Wow, this is great." 2 minutes later, I get a phone call. "Mr. Brando would like to see you in the trailer." So I go into the trailer and we're talking. He's asking about my family, about my life, whatever. And he goes, "By the way, I don't want to shoot that scene tomorrow." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I want to do the scene where I beat up the guy." I said, "Well, that's exterior, out on a street. We can't get a permit. I mean, we're not prepared for that." He goes, "Well, that's what I want to do. I don't want to shoot the other scene." I said, "I'm not sure, Marlon. I don't think I can get a permit." He goes, "I'll bet you $100. I'll make one phone call. We'll get you a permit." I said, "Well, you know what? Let me bring Frank into this conversation." I said, "I have my concerns about upsetting the schedule." He goes, "Fine, go get Frank." So Frank comes in and Marlon says, "I want to shoot the scene." And Frank goes, "Oh, the one where you hit the guy with the fire poker on the arm?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yeah, it's in the script. You hit the guy on the arm." He goes, "I hit the guy on the arm?" He goes, "Yeah, we're building a prosthetic." Marlon literally goes, "Oh my God." Frank goes, "What?" He goes, "You're pre-directing the movie. I've never worked with a control freak before. How do you know I'm going to hit him on the arm?" Frank goes, "It's in the script." Marlon looks at me, spins, and he goes, "Get out." And literally, I walk out of the trailer. 5 minutes later, Frank comes storming out of the trailer. I don't know what transpired, but he was furious. And this was day one.
A few months before his death, Brando was preparing to make another film. An incredible story, a veritable fable. Among all the scripts piled up at his home, he came across one written by a director from Tunisia. Brando summoned the author to Los Angeles.
Everybody in Tunisia and France and everywhere, everybody was making fun of me. Read a Bay with Brando?
Why did Brando call upon this unknown director from Kairouan, Tunisia? He had given money to the burgeoning Israeli state. He later visited Palestinian refugee camps and was deeply affected. It was no doubt to pay some kind of moral debt that he welcomed the Arab director, the symbol of a third world that had always interested him. When Brando stepped aside from his acting career, he was rich and able to indulge his great generosity. For many years, he devoted his time, his fame, and his irresistible smile to a number of major causes.
Do you think there's any chance that
He had helped Holocaust survivors. Now he would help the blacks and Indians of his own country.
a much larger crowd?
He traveled to support the civil rights movement in the South, in small racist towns where whites prevented blacks from voting, sometimes risking his life.
And I hope to, as a private citizen, to contribute to the protest.
Counting neither his time nor his money, he defended the radical Black Panthers movement.
Are being demonstrated here today.
He developed a passion for the cause of the American Indians, considering they had been victims of genocide for 2 centuries, and tirelessly fought on their behalf.
I feel that they do have a right to have their freedom. When we hear Mr. Reagan talk about freedom,
Well, he was political. I mean, look at some of the political statements he's made. You know, not showing up for your Academy Award, and you know, that's a political statement right there.
When Hollywood awarded him an Oscar for The Godfather, Brando sent Sachin Littlefeather to attend the ceremony in his place.
This country of the United States should be changed, and that the motion picture industry has dealt with the image of Indian people and helped to degrade it as much as the American government.
When black and Indian leaders told him, "Marlon, you are not black, you are not Indian, you cannot speak in our place," Brando fell silent. But a few months before his death, his activism resurfaced. He wanted to make this foreigner's film and talked with him at length on 7 occasions.
So it's the story of a young Tunisian who resembles Brando and who little by little thinks he is Brando. And he goes to the States, to Los Angeles, to meet Brando. The first thing he said to me was, "Your script sucks, it's a piece of crap. There's no way that after 9/11 and what happened that you can have a young man coming to become an actor. For me, your character, if he comes to meet Brando, he ends up at Guantanamo. That's the reality of America today. There's not going to be another Omar Sharif. From the start, your film has to be political. You have to be clear about that." So of course he proposed some concrete scenes, like the FBI pursuing this young man, and various details. For example, the young Tunisian comes to Brando's house, and he rings the bell at the main gate, and starts to recite a scene from Julius Caesar in front of the surveillance camera. So he's playing the scene in the rain, dressed in a sheet he's taken from his hotel, and Brando says to me, I'm in front of my screen watching that.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
And I loved this idea. The second day he said to me, "You've chosen Brando, sick, old, and a pain in the ass." He used that term. And secondly, you don't have a Jew with you as a producer. A Jew here in Los Angeles. You have no Jew, and that's a problem. But don't worry, we'll find a solution. At certain moments, when he was talking with that thing for breathing, for the oxygen, I dared ask him how we would do it, how we would film. And he said, I'll show you. Then he pulls the tube out. I thought it would just be for 2 or 3 minutes. But we did this session for an hour and a half without oxygen. Then he said, can I rest for a while now? I was very close to him. He was lying on the bed, and I saw his leg with the dry skin. I felt so badly for him, and I dared to put my hand on his leg. His eyes were closed, and suddenly he turned his head and opened one eye. And he looked at me with his smile, a fabulous smile. And I had this lump in my throat. But I also had a feeling of death. I wasn't thinking about death, but I felt that there was no need to make the film. I really felt at that moment that if I made the film, it would have been pure cynicism.
Brando's death 2 months later prevented him from making the film and realizing his dream. There was one magical place Brando missed above all others towards the end. The countryside where he sought refuge at his friend Joanne's. He adored the charm of the place. A bungalow and a bed were always ready for him here. When he could not be there, he spent hours calling his closest friends on the phone, and increasingly so as the end approached.
He would call and ask for Simba.
Simba is the dog.
Simba is the dog. And I would put the phone up to Simba's ear, and Marlon would talk to Simba, and never so much as say hello to me. Huh, Simba? Yeah.
And he had a conversation with him?
Oh, yeah, he had a conversation with him, yeah. Simba, you want to talk to your dad? Huh? Yeah, see? It's your dad. You want to talk, Marlon? You want to talk to him? No. Hello. Cha-cha. You want to talk on the phone? Want to say hello? Say hello? Hello. On the phone? Yeah. You want to talk on the phone and say hello? Hello. Well, people will probably think I've gone mad. Still, we still have Marlon's chickens in the... And Marlon would call me and have me take the speakerphone and go up to the chicken pen, and he would want to talk to the chickens.
These extravagances perhaps enabled him to ward off more painful and distressing thoughts concerning the disaster of his family life.
This was Jekyll and Hyde, Marlon as the father. One day he would nourish Christian. I mean, I spent hours listening to Christian tell me that the very best times that his father had, and also he, Christian, had with his father, was in Tahiti, when they would be running a bulldozer together, building the airstrip. Back in Los Angeles, when Christian was 15, 16 years old, there were times when Marlon would throw him out of the house and Christian would sleep in the street. Why? Because he didn't mow the lawn. Marlon was incapable of maintaining a relationship. But then again, let's remember that Marlon himself could never count on his beloved mother to be there for him.
In 1990, Brando's world collapsed. His eldest son, Christian, whom he had taken from his first wife, committed murder in Brando's own home. The victim was not a stranger, but the fiancée of his daughter, Cheyenne, who was pregnant. One alcohol and drug-fueled evening, Cheyenne confided to her stepbrother that her fiancé was beating her. Christian returned home, and using the pistol his father had asked him to bring that day, he shot the pretender in cold blood as he was watching TV. Christian was arrested and locked up.
See Mary over there? Over there.
Brando appeared in court to seek bail for his son.
You all right?
Many saw the expression of his emotion as merely an actor's performance. It was not enough to mollify the judges, and they demanded the astronomical sum of $10 million bail.
He was intent on trying to get Christian off, and And he did it badly, his performance there at the trial. Marlon basically had no morality. He'd never been taught that. He never developed it.
Brando mortgaged his assets and raised the 10 million. Christian's release played out like a movie premiere.
I'm proud to have my son out of jail, and right now we're just going to go home and relax.
What did Cheyenne repeat to me over and over and over again? You have seen the film The Godfather? My father, le parent vrai. Marlon's father was beating up Marlon's mother. They were both drunk. And Marlon, who was 15, 16 years old at the time, this is in Libertyville, the farm they had, went to his father's bureau and took the .45 automatic the father had from the army and went and jammed it in the father's face and was that far from killing him. Don't you ever beat my mother again, or I'll kill you. And the irony is this is precisely what Marlon told Christian to do, but Christian didn't stop. With his own .45, Christian blew away the offending, nominally the wife beater. Tragedy. I'm not saying that Marlon said, go kill Dag Drolet. It was basically, run him off. You know, like he's a cowboy. Run him off our land. You understand what I'm saying?
Push him back to Tahiti.
Yeah, run him off. Get him out of here. Find out if he's really beating her up, and then get him the hell out of here. Christian starved for his father's approval. Does just that, but he takes it to the next level. And it's the end of life. It destroys the family, whatever is left of the family.
The day of the trial arrived.
Objection irrelevant.
The whole family was present. Brando was confident. He had hired the best lawyers.
Light a candle for the decedent, pay respects to the decedent, and then clean up the room.
Christian was finally sentenced to 10 years in prison. Brando could breathe again, but not for long. After her fiancé's murder, Cheyenne returned to Tahiti under escort to give birth to a baby boy. But the young mother was far from well. Tarita placed her in a psychiatric hospital, first in Tahiti, then in France. Marlon soon arrived to take over. He removed her from the clinic and retired to a chateau, devoting all his time to her, perhaps excessive in his attentions. He brought Cheyenne back to California, entrusting her to a local clinic where she went insane. Later, on returning to Tahiti, Cheyenne made several, finally succeeding and hanging herself in her mother's home. At the Papiti cemetery, where Brando's absence was glaring, Cheyenne joined her fiancé in the grave. Brando was through with Tahiti. He would never return. The father had lost his most precious jewel, the star, his paradise.
He was a terribly unhappy man. Cheyenne, this thing was Shakespearean. He had a knife in his heart after her death.
Marlon, what I did was always try to give him hope. I felt that was the best thing that I could offer him, was hope. Even being sick and dying, if he could, like for instance, we were designing a garden to plant the following March.
The deep, bottomless sadness of it is that he wound up fucking himself. He wound up screwing himself out of any chance of happiness. And in point of fact, by the very end, when his estate is taken over, his identity is taken over by an imposter. It's a matter of fact that 13 days before Marlon's death, there came into being a codicil to Marlon's will, which replaced the two designees, one being Alice Marshak, who had worked for Marlon more than anyone, and then Joanne Corrales. And these people were kicked out, and in their place, and then total strangers or relative strangers in Marlon's life who've come out of the woodwork and are presenting themselves as the best friend of Marlon Brando. You have a circus, and they're all feeding on the 300-pound decaying corpse of Marlon Brando.
2 weeks before his death, Brando confided the administration of his estate to a trio of newcomers, including a businessman and a Hollywood lawyer he'd only rarely frequented.
This signature is not the same as that signature. Signed on the same day, 18th of June, 2004, 2 weeks before his death. How he could have signed his name that way on the same date as this way? I don't think either one are Marlon's signature.
A number of suits have been filed to annul the will. The outcome is still unresolved.
He was near death. He couldn't read very well. At the end of his life, everything had to be read to him.
It was just very strange the way it all took place. The man was laying in a bed with tubes, you know, coming out of him and on oxygen. Can't hardly turn over by himself. And are you telling me that he was cognizant of what he was doing? And furthermore, where are the witnesses?
Drugs. They drugged him.
Who's they?
The people that locked the gate. And the codes didn't work anymore. And so none of his friends could get in to see him. We're literally locked out of the compound. I got a call from him, and said, "Come on over," and I didn't even know who it was. And then I went over. The code didn't work anymore. I think it was engineered. I don't know if he was killed, but I know it was helped. Nobody was preventing it, and it could have been prevented because you saw him 10 days before. He was sharp as a tack.
Well, the great American people are people who stepped off the boat, and John Wayne said, "Well, glad to have you here, partner. You're a great American, in case you didn't know it."
A lot of people are interested in finding out the truth.
And particularly the last 2 years were distinguished by the absence of morality. His will, the mess, the anarchy, the chaos that he left, it was not characterized by morality in any way. So it was the absence of a reason for living, whether it's love or commitment or loyalty to something. And the end of his life showed the absence, the vacuity of that. When we were sitting there that last day, when we talked about death, it was always his presumption I was going to die first. And he'd say, "Georgie, what am I going to do when there's nobody to laugh with?" That's what's gotten us through. That's what's made it possible. You're going to die, aren't you? So I'll try not to, Marlon, but...
Marlon Brando could have had a funeral worthy of The Godfather. Hollywood would have organized an extravaganza. But his wishes were to be cremated anonymously and for his ashes to be rapidly scattered in the Death Valley desert.
He said, "Promise me that you will not let anybody see me dead." He said, "I want them to remember me the way, they saw me in their favorite movie or whatever," but he didn't want anybody to see him dead.
A few relatives carried out his wishes. But on that day in July 2004, a dust storm was blowing through Death Valley, making any ceremony impossible. In his urn, Brando must have been delighted. Finally, as they could see nothing, his friends put half the ashes in a paper bag and released them through a car window. Tarita took the other half back to Tahiti and cast them into the Tetiaroa Lagoon. Here and in California, Brando ended up as he had dreamed, gone with the wind. But what would he have thought if he learnt that his atoll was sold off to a developer to build a hotel for billionaires? The new executors sold it for just $2 million. It is worth 30 times more. Brando had never wanted to sell his island jewel, even when he needed money. He had wanted to leave it to the Tahitians and to nature lovers.
But if you measure the genius that he had, oh, what a man. But in the end, I think only Shakespeare could have taken care of somebody like Marlon.
The legend is going to build and build and build, if for no other reason than he's so difficult to pin down, to explain away. I mean, fame is a function always of mystery. Fame is, what is it we don't know? What more is there for us to learn about this person? And with Marlon, it just goes on and on and on.
And he was very intrigued.
From the depths of his reclusion, Brando had thought about his own legend in a rather surprising way. He had the idea, the first to do so, of making his actor's face eternal, thanks to digital technology.
This is the first full body scan
of his face.
Of his fan. This is all CG.
You did it.
Yes, I did. And then we did some plastic surgery.
And here on the waterfront.
Yeah. And so his idea was, he didn't really like going to the set so much, you know, and if we could make him digital,
yes,
that he could play any role at any age, at any weight, in perpetuity. Posterity is more of an ego thing. Perpetuity means it goes forever. Posterity is people remember you forever. He just wanted to live forever. He didn't want to necessarily be remembered forever. There's a big difference. Yeah. He just, you know, he didn't like...
Make him run a little bit.
Oh, he didn't like glamour. Nah.